The Frozen Sanctuary. Morell 5 was never meant for life. Its skies were a white void, its soil frozen glass, and the wind a constant gnashing chorus that tore across the plains like something alive and angry. The Galactic Empire had once tried to mine the planet for cryoreactive minerals, but after 3 failed colonies and 1 mysteriously collapsed outpost, it was left to the dust of forgotten stars. Only one soul remained on the surface, Torren Vex, a human mechanic with calloused hands, singed eyebrows, and a heart stitched together by too many things he'd never said aloud. He lived in a ramshackle garage at the base of a jagged ridge, built from old freighter parts and held together by stubbornness and thermal sealant. It wasn't much, just a patchwork of reinforced alloy plates, a solar heater rigged to an old pirate fusion coil, and a single landing pad that no ship had touched in over 6 months. But it was warm, and on Morell 5, that made it sacred. The storm outside had been howling for 3 days straight, so Torren was surprised when his proximity alert began flashing red. At first, he assumed it was another scrap drift hitting the sensors, a false trigger, easily dismissed. He stayed hunched over the melted guts of an old mining drone, elbows deep in hydraulic tubing, wrench gritted between his teeth. But the alert kept chiming. And then the garage lights flickered. Just once. He frowned, set the wrench down, and wiped his hands on his coat. Pulling up the external cam feed, he expected nothing but snow and wind. Instead, he saw them. 3 massive shapes slouched in the whiteout, barely visible, caked in layers of frost. Their outlines shifted with each slow, labored breath. They were enormous, reptilian, each one as long as a Starhopper shuttle. Wings sagged with ice, tails dragging like forgotten banners. Their scales, at least what wasn't hidden under frost, gleamed silver blue, etched with old scars and lines of crystalline growths. Dragons. Alien dragons. Torren's heart kicked against his ribs. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, looked again. Real. Motionless. Waiting. One of them, slightly smaller than the others, lifted its head and took an agonizing step forward. Its legs buckled, and it collapsed halfway across the snowfield, just outside the main garage bay. Steam rose from its nostrils. Its body trembled, and for a moment, Torren thought it was dying. Then it raised its head and spoke. The voice was like gravel beneath water, distorted but unmistakably intelligent. Shelter, it rasped, each syllable layered with pain. Please, mechanic, help us. Torren didn't move. Every survival instinct screamed at him to shut the door, to back away, to let whatever gods judge dragons do their work. But he didn't. Instead, he muttered, "Bloody hell," ran to the console, and slammed the override switch for the outer bay. Hydraulic servos groaned. The door parted, letting in a screaming rush of wind and snow. The warmth inside punched outward like a living thing. The dragons flinched but dragged themselves forward. One by one, they crawled into his garage, leaving trails of melted frost and slow, dying groans. The smallest limped. The middle one coughed blood onto the floor. And the largest, barely breathing, collapsed at the far end of the room, curling around a pile of disassembled engine cores like it was a nest. Torren ran forward and knelt beside the middle one, eyes wide, breath visible, hands shaking but already moving. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't a hero. He was just a mechanic. And something inside him refused to let anything die in his house. "You picked the right damn garage," he whispered. "Let's get to work. Healing the ancient." The first thing Torren did was slam every heat regulator into redline. His garage, built to handle the harshest Morell winters, had 4 fusion heaters salvaged from defunct terraformer drones. He rerouted their cores, overriding the safety interlocks and flooding the bay with heat so intense it made the ceiling drip. Within minutes, the frost began to thaw from the dragon's hides, revealing the full majesty and ruin of what they were. Their wings were frayed, gashes etched across the membranes like war maps. One had a splintered tail spike trailing blackened blood. Another had acid scars along its throat. Their scales shimmered faintly, signs of once mighty elemental cores buried inside, slowly fading with life. Torren moved between them like a battlefield triage unit. He set up drip feeders of warm synth gel, pried loose cracked armor plates embedded in their sides, sewed open wounds with thick industrial thread. One of them whimpered when he tightened a bolt down into a bone joint prosthetic. "Yeah, I know," he grunted, "but your blood's going to freeze if I don't anchor this right." The smallest dragon lifted its head, its voice softer, rasping through damaged vocal cords. "Why, help us?" Torren looked up, sweat dripping, eyes red from heat. "Because you asked." That stunned them. No reply, no explanation. They simply watched him. For hours, Torren worked, not because he had to, but because they needed him. Every breath they took reminded him of ancient creatures that should have burned starships, now reduced to begging at a human's door. His door. He didn't see monsters. He saw machines with hearts, beautiful, brutal, sacred systems waiting to be fixed. By dawn, the storm outside had quieted, and inside that crude mechanics bay, something impossible had happened. 3 dragons that should have died in the frost were breathing steadily again. One of them, Ethar, stood, bones creaking, and bowed his head to Torren. "You have given more than warmth," he said. "You have given worth." Torren just scoffed, tossed his stained gloves into a corner, and collapsed on a bench. "Dragons are dramatic, huh?" They didn't laugh, but one of them exhaled a puff of flame that warmed the whole room like a hearth. Torren smiled as his eyelids drooped. He hadn't just opened his door. He'd opened something else. Memories in the dark. The storm outside was gone, but its memory lingered in the silence of the garage. For the first time since the dragons had stumbled into his life, Torren Vex sat still, not fixing, not patching, not welding. Just watching. He'd built the garage himself, scrap by stubborn scrap, and in all his years of solitude, he'd never imagined dragons would one day curl around his old core furnace like they belonged there. 3 of them, breathing now, sleeping, sort of. The middle one, Vera, twitched in her sleep, exhaling short pulses of smoke through cracked fangs. The smallest, Rosk, was huddled beside the coils, eye half open, wings curled in like folded tarps. And Ethar, the largest, sat with his head turned slightly, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, not sleeping at all. Watching Torren with an intelligence too sharp to ignore. "You going to sit there forever?" Torren finally asked, voice rough from lack of rest. Ethar blinked slowly. "I am watching you because I do not understand you." "Get in line," Torren muttered, pulling a rag over his shoulder. "Neither does the rest of the galaxy." "You took us in," Ethar said, "without knowing who we were. What we carried. You were freezing. You were alive. That's enough." "You should have run," Ethar replied. Torren stood, moving to the bench by the back wall where his tools lay scattered. He ran his hand over the surface, restless. "You want to tell me why that matters now?" Ethar shifted, claws scraping faintly over the floor. "Because what we carry is not just hunger or fire. It is memory. And there are those who would kill to erase it." Torren turned, brow furrowed. "You're talking about the Accord, aren't you?" The dragon didn't nod, but the silence was its own kind of answer. "I thought they shut down those programs decades ago," Torren said. "Whatever they did to your kind, I figured they buried it with the rest of the containment zones." "They buried some of us," Ethar said darkly. "Others they froze. Stored. Watched. We were research, not beasts. Weapons, not lives. But we remembered. Even in ice." Torren was silent. The fire in the furnace crackled. Then Ethar added, "They want that memory gone. Especially now." Vera stirred in her sleep, releasing a small, high-pitched breath that caught in her throat. Torren moved before he realized it, laying a hand gently on her neck where the scales thinned and heat beat like a forge pulse. Her breathing eased. "Why now?" he asked. "Why chase you after all this time?" Ethar's eyes glowed brighter in the darkness. "Because we escaped from Kepler Station 3 months ago. And we took something with us that proves what they did to our people, what they're still doing." Torren felt ice form in his chest despite the heat around them. "What kind of proof?" "Memory crystals," Ethar said quietly. "Hundreds of them. Recording every experiment, every death, every scream. The Accord told the galaxy that dragons were extinct, a natural tragedy. But we have evidence of the genocide they committed." The word hung in the air like a physical weight. "Genocide. That's why you're running," Torren said, understanding dawning. "That's why you're half dead in the middle of nowhere. And that's why," Ethar said, lifting his great head, "helping us makes you an enemy of the most powerful organization in known space." Torren was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked back to his workbench, picked the hunt arrives. 2 days later, the hunters came. Torren was welding a support brace onto Vera's damaged wing when his long-range sensors screamed to life. 3 ships, military configuration, dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. They moved with the cold precision of Accord enforcement vessels, sleek, black, and utterly without mercy. "They found us," Rosk whispered, the smallest dragon's voice barely audible above the hum of the fusion cores. Ethar rose to his full height, head nearly touching the garage ceiling. "How long?" Torren checked his scanners, fingers flying across the console. 12 hours, maybe less if they pushed their engines hard. He looked at the 3 dragons, seeing not the magnificent creatures who had become his unlikely family, but refugees about to be dragged back to hell. "We need to run." "No," Ethar said firmly. "We run, they follow. We run, they find others like us who are still hiding. This ends here. This ends with you dead," Torren snapped. "All of you. And me too, probably." Vera lifted her head, her voice stronger now after days of rest and healing. "Then we fight." "With what?" Torren gestured around the garage. "I've got some mining charges, a few pulse rifles, and a really bad attitude." "They've got warships." "They have ships," Ethar corrected, moving toward a dark corner where Torren kept his most dangerous salvage. "We have something they fear more than any weapon." "What's that?" "The truth." Ethar's massive claw touched a sealed container that Torren had assumed held spare parts. Inside, wrapped in thermal blankets, were dozens of crystalline shards that pulsed with their own inner light, memory crystals, each one containing the recorded experiences of dragons who had died in Accord labs. "Every torture session," Ethar said quietly. "Every experiment. Every murder. All of it preserved in dragon memory crystal, impossible to fake or alter. This is what they're really hunting." Torren stared at the crystals, understanding the true weight of what he'd gotten himself into. This wasn't just about 3 refugee dragons. This was about justice for an entire species. "All right," he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "Then we make sure the galaxy sees these memories before the Accord silences us forever." He moved to his communications array, a jury-rigged system that could punch through hyperspace static if he pushed it hard enough. "I'm going to broadcast everything on every emergency channel I can reach. Military, civilian, news networks, pirates, everyone. They'll jam the signal," Vera warned. "Not if we give them something else to worry about first." Torren's eyes gleamed with the same desperate brilliance that had kept him alive on this frozen world for so long. "Rosk, can you still fly?" The smallest dragon nodded, though his wing membrane was still patched with industrial tape. "Good. Because I need you to take these crystals and get as far from here as possible. Find other dragons, find anyone who'll listen, and make sure these memories survive." "What about you?" Rosk asked. Torren looked at Ethar and Vera, seeing his own resignation reflected in their ancient eyes. We're going to buy you time. And if we're very lucky, we might just remind the galaxy what happens when humans get angry. Outside, the Accord ships grew closer, their sensors already scanning Morell 5's frozen surface. Inside the garage, a human mechanic and 2 alien dragons prepared for a battle that would either spark a revolution or end in their deaths. Either way, Torren thought as he checked his weapons one last time, it beats dying alone. Up a plasma torch, and began adjusting its settings. Well, he said without looking up, I never liked authority much anyway. Fire and justice. The Accord ships descended through Morell 5's atmosphere like dark angels of judgment, their hulls gleaming against the white void sky. Torren watched them approach from his garage's observation deck, Ethar and Vera flanking him like ancient guardians. Remember, he said into his communicator, wait for my signal, then punch the broadcast through every channel you can find. Rosk's voice crackled back from orbit, where the smallest dragon had managed to reach an old communications satellite. Ready, Torren. The crystals are safe. Good. Torren hefted his rifle, a modified mining laser that could punch through ship armor if he got lucky. Ethar, Vera, you sure about this? The 2 dragons exchanged a look that spoke of decades spent in captivity, of friends who had died screaming in laboratories, of a species driven to the edge of extinction by bureaucratic cruelty. We are sure, Vera said, flame beginning to flicker between her fangs. The first Accord dropship touched down 50 meters from the garage, its ramp lowering to disgorge a squad of soldiers in environmental suits. Their leader, a tall woman with cold eyes and the insignia of an Accord executor, stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had never faced real resistance. Torren Vex, she called out, her voice amplified by external speakers. You are harboring escaped experimental subjects. Surrender them and yourself, and your death will be swift. Torren stepped out onto the landing pad, his rifle casual in his hands. Executor, sorry, didn't catch your name. Executor Kane. You have 10 seconds to comply. Kane. Torren nodded thoughtfully. Tell me something, Kane. How many dragons did you personally oversee the murder of? The executor's expression didn't change, but her hand moved toward her sidearm. The research conducted at Kepler Station was for the greater good of. Greater good? Torren's voice cut through the frozen air like a blade. You mean genocide? 5 seconds. Here's the thing, Kane, Torren said, raising his rifle. I've been alone on this frozen rock for 3 years. Do you know what that does to a man? It makes him stop caring about odds. He pulled the trigger. The modified mining laser struck Kane's center mass, punching through her armor and dropping her instantly. The other soldiers opened fire, but Ethar and Vera burst from the garage like living starships, breathing streams of superheated plasma that turned the landing zone into a hell of molten snow and screaming metal. Now, Rosk. Torren shouted into his communicator as he dove for cover behind a fuel tank. High above, every emergency broadcast channel in 3-star systems suddenly erupted with crystal-clear recordings of dragon voices, testimonies of torture, evidence of systematic extermination, proof of the Accord's darkest crimes. The memory crystals spoke with the voices of the dead, and their words spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The battle was brief but vicious. Accord soldiers were trained to fight human rebels and alien pirates, not ancient dragons whose fury had been tempered by decades of suffering. Vera's claws tore through powered armor like tissue paper. Ethar's breath weapon melted gun barrels and turned soldiers' weapons into slag. But numbers tell, eventually. Torren took a pulse rifle blast to the shoulder that spun him around and sent him crashing into his workbench. Vera stumbled as a rocket exploded against her flank. Ethar roared in pain as concentrated fire from the orbiting ships raked across his back. Through the smoke and chaos, more dropships were landing. Too many to fight. Then the first news ship arrived in system. Then another. And another. The memory crystal broadcasts had done their work. Every major news network in Alliance space was converging on Morell 5, drawn by the greatest story of the century, proof that the Galactic Accord had committed genocide against an entire sapient species. The Accord ships found themselves surrounded by media vessels, their every move being broadcast live to billions of viewers. When Executor Kane's replacement tried to order the destruction of the garage and everyone in it, the public outcry was immediate and deafening. "Stand down," came the transmission from Accord Command, broadcast on open channels for all to hear. "All units, stand down and withdraw immediately." In the sudden silence that followed, Torren picked himself up from the floor of his ruined garage and looked at his dragon friends, battered, bloodied, but alive. Outside, the news ships were already launching investigation teams. "Is it over?" Vera asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ethar, despite his wounds, managed something that might have been a smile. "It is beginning." 6 months later, Torren Vex stood before the Galactic Justice Tribunal as their star witness. The memory crystals had sparked the largest investigation in galactic history, leading to the arrest of hundreds of Accord officials and the liberation of 17 surviving dragons from secret facilities across known space. The dragons had been officially recognized as a sapient species with full galactic citizenship rights. Reparations were being paid. The Accord's research division had been disbanded in disgrace. And Torren? He'd been offered a medal, a pension, and a place in history. He'd turned them all down and gone back to Morell 5. Because his garage wasn't just a garage anymore. It was a sanctuary, the first stop for dragons seeking their scattered families, a place where ancient beings could rest and heal, a symbol of what happened when ordinary people chose to do extraordinary things. 3 months after the tribunal, as Torren was working on the engine of a dragon transport ship, Ethar approached him with a question that had been years in the making. "Why?" the great dragon asked. "You could have turned us away that first night. You could have let us die. Why didn't you?" Torren looked up from his work, his hands stained with oil and his heart full of contentment he'd never expected to find. "Because," he said simply, "you asked for help. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change the galaxy." Outside, in the clear skies above Morell 5, dragons flew free for the first time in generations. Their wings caught the light of distant stars, and their voices carried songs of joy that echoed across the frozen plains, songs of survival, of justice, and of the human mechanic who had opened his door to the impossible. In his small garage at the base of a jagged ridge, Torren Vex smiled and went back to work. There were more dragons coming, more hearts to heal, more lives to save. And in the warmth of his sanctuary, surrounded by the purr of engines and the whispered gratitude of ancient beings, he finally understood what home really meant. The end.